Hi everybody, we're back to finish, maybe not to finish, but to continue on your chapter 12 lecture. So I left off talking about Freud's psychosexual theory of development. And so his theory basically suggests that the first few years of life are critical, specifically the first 6 years are critical to your development. And through good parenting, you're going to have a really strong super ego built, a good strong sense of morality, and it's going to help you make rational decisions throughout your life. He suggested that there's conflicts that emerge at each stage of life, and they're centered around an erogenous zone, or there's a sexual driving force underpinning these conflicts, and that the good parenting is going to help you resolve this conflict in a positive, healthy way. And poor parenting may contribute to you becoming fixated, and that now kind of sticks with you in your unconscious for the rest of your life, and it's manifested in other ways. So first, he talks about oral development, where the erogenous zone is your mouth, thus the oral, and it's really relating to the sucking that's going on for breastfeeding and bottle feeding. And he suggested that if a mother weans you too soon, you might become fixated. If she overindulges you and feeds you too much, you might become fixated. So you've heard of somebody that might be orally fixated, and that means that they didn't have their oral needs met or gratified as infants, and so they are constantly striving to meet those needs throughout life. They might chew gum, they might chew tobacco, they might smoke. You can also have overindulgence can lead to fixation, where that person's really gullible and they fall for anything. They're overly dependent and they're overly passive. The anal stage now is moving into toddlerhood, and the erogenous zone is the anus, because the main primary development is focused around toilet training or potty training at this age. Potty training really represents a lot of independence and autonomy. And so you might have a mother that really kind of is overly controlling and critical and demanding about potty training, maybe pushing the child too soon, and that can result in a fixation where that child might become anal and they're demanding and controlling and rigid and very compulsive. They're neat and organized, and they like structure and routine. You might have somebody that's anally expulsive if maybe they weren't taught to potty train early enough, and they're just messy and unorganized and maybe even rebellious, and they don't like order and rules, so it can be somewhat of a destructive personality type. Phallic is now your preschool years, your early childhood. And phallic, if you say something's phallic, you mean it's like penis-like, and so this is talking about genitals. And children at this age really become obsessed with their genitals. They very much discover their genitals. They can differentiate what makes a boy and a girl. And so they kind of become very self-aware of their genitals. They often, explore their genitals and play with their genitals. And I'll never forget Cole. At about 3, he discovered his penis, and that it grew and it got harder, and I couldn't get him out of the shower, and he was obsessed with, touching himself and washing himself, and I'd say, "Come on, honey," and he'd be, "Mommy, it grows," and I would say, "Well, baby, yes, it does, and it's going to continue to do that, but, you can't waste water. We only have so much time in the shower." But I think you have to be mindful not to shame them and not to make them feel like somehow their interest in their genitals is unhealthy, because that could in fact be unhealthy and detrimental to their well-being. And so Freud would say that you might create a fixation, but at the same time you have to set boundaries. Like I had to teach Cole, "Honey, I get that it feels good, and I understand you want to touch it, and that's great, but you can't touch it in the middle of Target. there's boundaries, and your bedroom's fine, and wash your hands after, and that kind of stuff. So just finding that balance, again, that's kind of a central theme of Freud's theory, is balance. And so Freud also said that this is really a critical time because their children experience an Oedipus complex for little boys and an Electra complex for little girls, where little boys are attracted to their moms and they find their mom to be really desirable, and so they look at their dad as kind of a competition, and he's distracting mom's attention from them, and when they get older they want to marry mom, and so they really need to eliminate dad out of the picture, and it kind of stems from that Greek mythology. So they want to kill off dad so they can marry mom and have mom all to themselves. And the same is true with the Electra complex, in that they're obsessed with their dad. They are attracted to their dad, and so mom's competition, and they want to eliminate mom so they can be with dad. So they develop hostile feelings toward their same-sex parent based on their attraction to their opposite-sex parent. And I have to tell you, it goes a little step further with little girls, because they're thought to be angry and bitter at their moms because they have penis envy, and they feel like a penis represents superiority, so they're mad at mom because they didn't get the penis. Now, mind you, I agree with absolutely not one iota of this theory where this is concerned. I certainly see how, just through natural development, the oral stage is important, or the anal stage, or even the genitals, but I certainly don't see this to this extreme. But I will say there was a time when the best example I have of Oedipus complex is one year I have two little kids, Cole and Kayla, and I have two older kids, Jesse and Alexis, and there's 10-year differences plus in age. And so I kind of have a first litter and a second litter, and my older kids help take care of my younger kids. My daughter Alexis is my oldest daughter. She really is more like a mother figure to her siblings. She is my co-parent. She helps me bathe them and pack their lunches and do their homework and all that other stuff. And so my little ones love her like a mother. And I remember Cole one year, and he loves and adores his sister. He says, "Oh, you're so beautiful." And he touches her hair. And when she came down the stairs and she was in her prom dress, he started crying because she was so beautiful. He loves her so much. One year for his birthday or Christmas, I don't remember which, but he says, "Mom, I want a poster of Justin Bieber." And I was like, "What? He doesn't even like Justin Bieber." And he says, "Yeah, when I get my poster of Justin Bieber, I'm going to throw darts at it, Mom." And so I thought, that's the best example of the Oedipus complex I have, because he had animosity toward Justin because Justin was distracting Alexis from him. And it's not that he wanted to grow up and have sex with his sister or marry his sister, but he valued that bond and that closeness with his sister. And so anybody that distracted her from him was competition. So then we move into middle childhood, which is the latency stage. And by latent, it's kind of dormant or hidden. And Freud said that really they don't have any main erogenous zones during this time, and it just falls into kind of a dormancy period. But in reality, we know with modern research, actually puberty is starting about that time, and even before their bodies start to physically change, they do start to experience their first sexual attractions and desires. I'm sure you might remember back in elementary school when you had your first crush, and you may have pulled her ponytails or chased him around the playground and played tag, and maybe you pushed him or picked on him. But really and truly, there was another child that may have sparked your fancy a little more than the rest of the children. And then finally, Freud ended with the genital stage, which is in adolescence from puberty onward. He said at this stage, it's really all about establishing healthy relationships with opposite sex partners, there really wasn't an allowance for homosexual relationships in Freud's theory because it really wasn't an acceptable time. Keep in mind that Freud grew up during the Victorian era. It's a very rigid, restrictive, sexually repressed era. And so this was a very, very liberal theory. And it discussed sex. And for me to even show my ankle in that era, I would have been an absolute slut. And so it took a lot of courage, although I feel like there's a little bit of sexual twistedness to it. I do think that it was incredibly innovative. He was a pioneer, and I have immense respect for his insightfulness and his intellect. But overall, I disagree with his theory. One aspect of his theory that tends to be very persistent is defense mechanisms. This has persisted the test of time. He suggested because we have that unconscious, that we repress things into the unconscious, and defense mechanisms are kind of that first response to something that might be detrimental to our psychological and emotional well-being. It's our psyche's way of protecting itself. It's a shield, so to speak. And it helps us to, in the short term, reduce anxiety, but in the long term, distort reality because it blocks us from recognizing the real problem. Freud really introduced the notion of repression, where we bury stuff into the unconscious, and Anna Freud developed the other defense mechanisms. Repression for me is very personal. I have a very vivid memory of the day my brother took his life. I remember what I was wearing. I remember the phone call. I remember the drive from the bank. I remember who was in the bank. I remember very vividly finding my brother when I arrived home, who was there, and where they directed me, and what I was wearing, and kicking off my shoes. And as I'm just even swirling through it, I can tell you all the imagery in my mind. But I don't remember a wound. I held him in my arms. I cried with him. And I cried over him. He was gone at that point, but I don't remember a wound. And remembering that wound would just add pain and heartbreak. And so unconsciously, I don't need that. And so that's an example of how a defense mechanism can be valuable for you. Denial, is where you just are choosing not to acknowledge it, and so I don't have a drinking problem. You want to remain consciously unaware of it, and obviously that's a blockade from you getting help or you taking steps toward improvement. Rationalization is when you're making excuses for it, and so you're really not attending to the real factors that might be contributing to the problem. Projection is like a projector. It's something in me, and I'm projecting an image onto you. I remember my ex-husband, he cheated on me, but yet he started accusing me of cheating on him. And then I remember my counselor saying, "Could he be cheating on you?" And I thought, oh my gosh, sure enough, he was cheating on me. And found his wedding ring hanging around his rearview mirror at the office, and just a big old long story. But if you ever want to hunt down who they're cheating with, let me know. I'm really good at it. Reaction formation is kind of you're reacting in a way that's opposite of how you truly feel, like the politician that's all, against same-sex marriage, and that's unbiblical, and it's an abomination, only to find out that they're having homosexual relations with their intern or something. Displacement is when you're redirecting your anger or frustration to a safer target, like you go home and kick the dog instead of yelling at your boss or yelling at your teacher. And then finally, sublimation, you're redirecting maybe some repressed urges into something socially acceptable. I might have sexual desires toward a coworker, so I paint nudes or I create these wonderful sculptures or something of that nature. And then finally, intellectualization. I rationalize things away in a very intellectual manner, so I channel Einstein. I'm dealing with myocardial infarction instead of a heart attack, and this is something Mike does, so I'm very familiar with it. Okay, we'll stop there and come back in just a minute.